Welcome, everybody, to Slammed, a podcast brought to you by Odyssey, where we cover everything Boston Celtics. I'm Meghan Ottolini of WEI and Odyssey, and today I'm joined by Reuben Frank, a special guest. He's a host and longtime columnist covering the Eagles for NBC Sports Philadelphia. He also works with 94 WIP. And Rube, can I call you Rube for starters? Sure. Okay, Rube, correct me if I'm wrong here. You've been covering the Eagles since 1988?
Middle of 87 during the strike. Okay. So, yeah, quite a while.
Okay. So
actually, my first game that I ever covered as the beat writer was in Foxborough. It was an Eagles-Patriots at Schaefer Stadium overtime game where each kicker missed a field goal in overtime. And I think the Eagles finally won. I think Tom Ramsey threw for like 450 yards against the Eagles that day. But I don't remember what happened last week, but I remember that game in 87.
Well, it's feeling a lot more like those days around Foxborough right now. But we actually didn't bring you on to talk about football. You'll have plenty of that to do over the next 2 weeks because the Eagles are going back to the Super Bowl. So again, really appreciate you being here at such a busy time for all Eagles writers, everybody in the coverage there. There was this little bit of news that Bill Simmons dropped on everybody on his podcast earlier this week about Jeffrey Lurie, the Eagles owner since 94, I believe, in the running for the bidding for the Celtics. Now, the Celtics bidding process, we know that last Thursday was the deadline for everybody to submit their bids. They were expecting somewhere between 4 and 5 bids. That's what was out there. And we know that Steve Pagliuca, a minority owner currently in the Celtics, has intentions of having his own consortium of people bidding on it. But otherwise, it's kind of we've been left in the dark trying to figure out who else is out there. So I guess my first question for you is, knowing Lurie and the way that he operates his financials with the Eagles, is this a surprise to you? How much stock do you put into this bit of information?
I wouldn't say it's a shock because, he grew up in Boston and went to school there. He's got really strong ties. I remember him pointing out his season ticket seats in Schaefer Stadium to me before a game once. So he's always been a huge Celtics fan, a huge Boston sports fan, an obsessive Boston sports fan. I don't know if there's any other kind. And so, a couple months ago, he sold a chunk of the franchise, 8% share, with the 8.3 billion valuation. It came out to about $660 million. We didn't really know why he was trying to raise cash, but you kind of jump to conclusions, and it could have something to do with the bid for the Celtics. I'm not the one thing that surprises me is that he's a 77-year-old guy now. He's not a young kid now. He's been grooming his son Julian to take over the Eagles at some point, which we anticipate. But it is a little surprising that at his age, like I don't anticipate if he did, or if a group that he leads did buy the Celtics, that he would be as much of a day-to-day type owner as he has been here for the last 30 years. But it's certainly interesting because he's always, he bid on the Patriots in 93, 2 years before, or 92 or 93, 2 years before he bought the Eagles. So he's always had interest in that market and those teams, and he's always been very close to them.
So through my own research, at the risk of sounding like some unpopular quarterbacks right now, through my own research, I did see that when he was in the process of trying to bid on the Patriots, that he had an uncle who has since passed that looked at the financials and said, this doesn't really make sense. You say that now it's apparent that he's grooming his son Julian to take over his responsibilities as owner with the Eagles. How involved, what is the dynamic like with this family? Is it him still holding the reins the way that we're seeing a little bit with Robert Kraft in his later years here? Or is this something where there are many minds who are coming together to make decisions about financials?
It's him. He's the one. And, he's always been they have minority owners, but he holds total control of the organization. And that's been made clear at every step, whether, whenever he's taken on a minority owner or sold a chunk of the team, it's been made clear that he still operates the franchise. Nobody else does. So it's him. He's making the decisions. And he's certainly a guy that is collaborative and trusts the people around him, and has people that he's very careful to pick to surround him. But he makes the calls, and it's always been that way.
So, how much has he changed since he bought the Eagles in the way that he operates? How public, how transparent is he, at least on the scale of an owner for a professional team? And what is the feeling among fans? Look, you're going to the Super Bowl yet again, so I would imagine that the vibes are good, that there's warm, fuzzy feelings towards ownership. But since that purchase in '94, how has that fluctuated? How is he seen by fans and media as an owner?
I think when he first bought the team, he was kind of seen as an outsider. I mean, obviously, Philadelphia sports fans aren't enamored of Boston,
Hmm.
people from New England, and it's just the way it's always been. And I'm sure it works both ways. So it took him a while to really kind of win people over around. He was seen in his early years as a meddler in draft stuff and personnel stuff, and there might have been some truth to that early on. I think he learned once Andy Reid came here in '99. He kind of learned to stay out of the way of that stuff and leave it to the experts. Which, look, he's still involved. You see him in the draft room talking to the scouts and everything. But I think it took him a while to really win over the Philadelphia sports fan. Really, probably over the last 10, 12 years, when they started going to Super Bowls somewhat frequently, although it might not seem like frequently to people in New England when it's kind of an annual, or was an
These
annual.
days it does.
Yeah, that's true. So it took a while. It really did. And but I think now he's really seen. Look, this franchise went to one Super Bowl before he bought the team in 1980, and it's now been to four since he bought the team. So I think people have finally kind of come around to him and understand that he wants what's best for the city, what's best for the team. And I think it's really helped that he spends a lot of time here. We see him at practice all the time, where his predecessor, who owned the team, he lived in Miami. He ran a bunch of car dealerships down there, and he was never involved. We never saw him after games and that kind of thing. So I think he's super hands-on. He doesn't talk to the media very often, at least not on the record. We talk on the sidelines at practice. He's a big music guy. Jeff Lurie produced that Summer of Soul movie about the 1969 R&B concerts in Harlem, New York, with his production company. And they have a movie coming out, I think, this year on the life of Billy Preston, the great keyboard player from the Beatles and the Stones and all that. So that kind of gives everybody a little common ground to talk to him about without talking about football. But really, other than the owners' meetings, he really doesn't talk to us on the record. We'll see him media day on Monday. What's today? Tuesday? I don't even know what day today is, but yeah, we'll see him down there, and he'll talk to us. But he's not super involved. He's not like Jerry Jones, who talks every week after games. He leaves that stuff to the GM and the coaches. But I think he really did win people over. It just took quite a while till he wasn't seen as an outsider and a interloper in Philadelphia.
From a money perspective, we have been talking about who could buy the Celtics since last summer, when the shocking news comes out that the growth specs are going to be selling off their majority shares. And people throw out wild names, Bezos, that level of wealth. Does the level of wealth that the Lurie family, Jeffrey and whoever Julian may be taking over, is that enough to straddle the Eagles and the Celtics? When you look at the Celtics roster right now, and they're coming into two supermax players and well into the second apron. I mean, they're going into Golden State territory. And I guess from your perspective, does those selling off those 8% of shares in December indicate that this is going to be an ownership group that would be fiscally responsible with both franchises? And is there any concern locally for you? I just threw a bunch at you. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, without knowing what's in his checking account right now, exactly, it's hard to tell. I mean, Eagles are valued at over $8 billion.
Mm-hmm.
He's obviously a really wealthy guy. I don't know what goes into owning multiple pro sports franchises. Obviously, the Eagles have been incredibly profitable. He bought the team for $185 million. They're now worth $8.6 billion. So he's made a few dollars with the investment. It's a great question, and I'm sure that's something that the NBA is going to investigate really thoroughly if his bid is accepted, and they have to decide whether he can do it and he can handle it and he has the cash. He's the kind of guy who's not going to go into something without being 100% prepared with the financials and having every number scrutinized by his money people. It's just not his way. So I'm assuming that he's more than capable of doing this financially. I would guess he's got people already in mind if this does happen. I guess he wouldn't take over until 2028, as I understand, the new owner.
That's what Wyc Grousbeck has said, that there would basically be a partial sale, hopefully this year, and he would remain as governor of the team. And I think that is, candidly, I think that's Wyc's own interest in wanting to stay involved with the team because it is a real passion project for him. But we have all looked at that and said, that's what Wyc wants to do. We'll see when the new owner comes in, what the lawyers sort out and what the deal on paper actually is.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff Lurie doesn't go into any project if he's not 100% convinced it's going to work, it's going to make sense, and it's going to make money.
Well, that's a good way to approach business. I guess from the perspective of Eagles fans, I can't imagine this is front of mind with everything coming up in the next 2 weeks. Is it on Eagles fans' radar at all that their owner could be going into Boston market with the most expensive team in the league in the Celtics and diving into that water while going on with everything over here?
Yeah, it's interesting. It really hasn't caused a blip here. And it's kind of funny because Josh Harris, the owner of the Sixers, last year bought the Commanders, who the Eagles just beat in the NFC Championship game. So it's kind of like a really similar potential structure. Fans here can't stand Josh Harris. I think there's a couple reasons for that. The Sixers haven't been to an NBA final since 2001. I think that's part of it, and just the Washington connection. But Philadelphia sports fans probably hate the Celtics as much as Washington's football team. So it's an interesting setup. But this team is having so much success now, 3 Super Bowls in 8 years. The way they're playing now, I don't think anybody's getting real worked up about this. Maybe if it gets to the next step and he closes in on making a purchase, maybe. I just think this city is so Eagle-centric that I just don't see it becoming an issue. And I think he's done enough as an owner here that fans they might not love it if he did end up buying the Celtics, but I really don't think it would affect the way they perceive him.
The way that you perceive him, how different do you think he would see his relationship owning the Celtics? It seems like it's something born out of his own fandom, where he's clearly become an Eagles fan buying the team, but this is the team he grew up with. He went to high school in Cambridge. He went to 3 different schools in this area for advanced degrees. And do you think that there are any barriers for a football owner going into the NBA that maybe they don't anticipate, of how different it may work operating these little NBA teams with huge salaries? It's just it's a very different league that way.
It is. And again, I'm sure he's done his due diligence. I'm sure he's got friends who are owners in the NBA. You know how rich people tend to hang out and talk to each other. So I'm sure he's looked into all that. It is different just because, he didn't really know the Eagles history and all that stuff when he bought this team. He was new to the area, new to the franchise. But the amount of knowledge he's accumulated over the years, if you're, I don't know if you've ever been to Lincoln Financial Field, but it's the whole entryway is this like museum of Eagles history. And that's all Jeff Lurie. He's really connected the franchise to its past. It's got such a a rich past going back to the 1930s. And I think the Celtics are really similar in that way. It's an old time franchise that hasn't moved, hasn't changed its name. And I think that appeals to him. My biggest question is, he's such a hands-on owner here. He lives here. He's in Florida frequently, but he's here a lot of the time. You can't be in two places at once. And I'm not sure how hands-on an owner you can be with two teams at the same time. And he really prides himself on being in his office. We see his car out front of the NovaCare complex, 2, 3, 4 times a week. We see him in the hallways. We see him at practice. You can't do that with two teams. So I don't know how different his day-to-day responsibilities would be if he did own both teams, or maybe buying the Celtics would coincide with handing this team over to his son. That just kind of occurred to me.
That's what I was about to ask. Is it possible, again, because you start out noting he's 77 years old, is he moving on to more hands-on with the passion project now that Junior has the reins, has his training wheels off?
Yeah, it would line up that way. And Julian's been officially with the team since 2021, I think, and doing a variety of different things. And he's worked in, with the scouts and with the ticket sales and every department to get experience about the whole franchise. So yeah, Jeffrey might think that Julian's ready to take over, and you move up to Boston and keep an eye on that franchise. And just speculating, but the timing could work out that way.
My final question, just looking at the Eagles, and it's never going to be a one-to-one comparison, but they did build the Link. They built Lincoln Financial Field, moved them out of Veterans, and the Celtics are tenants in the Bruins building at TD Garden. And so one of the biggest parts of speculation with this sale is you're asking people to bid on a team for $6 billion that doesn't have the real estate that many NBA teams have in having their own arena, and wondering if whoever the buyer is would want to grab some real estate around Boston, build their own arena, their own stadium, and have the Celtics live there, no longer be essentially paying rent to Delaware North, the Bruins Corporation. And just in watching how this ownership progressed in building a stadium in Philly, do you have any idea whether that might be something that they would be interested in doing? Would it make sense from a sale perspective? If they don't do that, I know it's a little bit speculative, but just in your experience covering them.
Well, I do know building a stadium that, building a stadium that the team controlled was a priority once, from the day he bought the franchise till they built the Link. I can't imagine that's not on his mind, but not a lot of open space in Boston to build a basketball arena. So yeah, I don't know how people in the city would feel about having an arena out in the suburbs, like some teams do. And my brother lives up in Boston and just takes the train to North Station and walks over to I know that's a lot of people do that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine the Celtics playing outside Boston. It's really hard to picture that. And it's hard to picture finding a place to build a new arena within the city. Maybe it's possible, but it's a great question. I'm sure all things being equal, he'd rather control the arena. I don't know how practical that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say there's been tons of speculation around, hey, there's some industrial plots of land over here down in Dorchester. Would someone from the Wynn family want to buy a piece of the team or the majority stakes? And they just built the casino out in Everett, which is just north of the city. So again, it's the idea of they wouldn't be right downtown where TD Garden is, right next to the north end. It would be a little bit further to the outskirts, but just an idea, just wondering. Reuben Frank, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I love talking to people with institutional knowledge going back to 1988. Sounds like you've got a lot on Eagles ownership. So if this goes through, I hope you'll be able to return and talk with us again, because
Sure thing.
It would be a big deal. It would be a big deal to us.
Yeah, yeah. Anytime. We'll see. We'll see what happens, and we'll see Jeffrey on Monday, and I'm sure this is going to be a big topic with him because he hasn't addressed it publicly. So we'll see what he says on Monday.
Okay, we'll tune into you at NBC Sports Philadelphia. That was hard to get out because I'm so used to saying NBC Sports Boston, doing work with them, but NBC Sports Philadelphia. Reuben Frank, thanks so much.
Sure thing.